Well, you know, as you know, this is the part of the show where we usually run some video. It's often funny video about the hot story of the day, and then I hide behind that video fixing my tie. But tonight, as you can already see, it's a little different. We will get to the hot story of the day, and Rachel is actually going to come back and help me with that. She really is. But first, I want to talk about crying, because I'm also going to talk about some things that have made me cry, and I might have to pause once or twice when I do that. So I just want you to be forewarned, because what could be more shocking than an anchorman crying? The first commandment of television is anchormen don't cry, which is why I will never be and will never feel like a real anchorman. If an anchorman was ever going to cry, it would have been November 22nd, 1963.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
There is no moment in anchorman history that anchormen admire more than that. The composure, the strength, the authority, when the rational emotional response was to throw his hands down on the desk and cry. Cry for JFK, cry for his young children, cry for the country. I was a kid at St. Brendan's Elementary School in Boston that day, President Kennedy's hometown, and when we were let out of school early, every one of us was crying. Every teacher was crying. Adult men walking the streets of Boston carrying briefcases, men who looked like Walter Cronkite, were crying. Cops were crying. Subway cars were filled with people crying, but anchormen didn't cry. I marveled at the anchormen who didn't cry that day. I wondered how they got all that ice in their veins, but now I understand it. If an anchorman cries, he will make the story about himself. There will be a giant headline saying, "Anchorman cries." It was a Friday when those first graders and teachers were murdered in Newtown, Connecticut. I normally don't do this show on Fridays, but the network asked me to do a special edition of The Last Word that night, and I said I couldn't do it because I would just sit at my anchorman desk and cry, and that would make the story about me. No words came to me that day about what happened to those children, just feelings. Because I'm not a real anchorman. I just play one on TV. And I'm not sure anchormen helping teach America how to suppress emotion in the face of tragedy has been such a good thing for this country. Anchormen aren't the only people who suppress emotion in the face of tragedy now. Did you cry when you heard about those college kids getting stabbed and shot by the mass murderer in Santa Barbara last month? The constant recurrence of public tragic events has coarsened us all. But I've been shut off from all of that for the last several weeks. I've been consuming almost no news. It has been 75 days since I put on a necktie and did my anchorman thing, and a lot has happened to me, beginning with the longest few seconds of my life. It was just after dark fell on Saturday night in Pirates of the Caribbean territory, the Virgin Islands. I was in a taxi. It was a big old van with 3 rows of seats. I was in the first row, right behind the driver. My big brother, Michael, was in the row behind me. He's not actually bigger than I am anymore, but when I was 4 and he was 12, he was a lot bigger and a lot smarter and a lot braver. You know, of all the advantages a boy can have growing up, there's nothing quite like a heroic big brother. And Michael O'Donnell's 3 little brothers have always had that advantage every day of our lives. Michael saw the crash coming and yelled something a billionth of a second before the noise started. I was looking down at a map on my iPhone, and so it was the deafening noise that told me we were in a collision. The noise seemed to go on forever. I couldn't see anything. in the darkness, except the light of the radio in the center of the dashboard in front of me. And as the front end of that taxi was being crushed, that radio just kept moving closer and closer and closer to me. And I had what felt like a very long time to think about dying and what a stupid way to die this was, and to think about my daughter. And then the radio suddenly stopped moving, and the noise stopped. And I wasn't dead. I could see, and I could hear, and I could move my hands, and my arms worked. I wasn't dead. I was lucky to be alive. That cliche, lucky to be alive, was suddenly so true to me, so profound. It was such a warm feeling. We should all feel it all the time, but a lot of us don't until we get this close to the end. And I had a couple of near-death experiences in my teens and 20s, on a motorcycle, that kind of thing, but I was too young to learn the lesson. But at 7:45 p.m. on April 12, 2014, I finally got it. Lucky to be alive. I felt so lucky to be alive that if you told me then that I just lost a leg, I would have said, that's okay, I'm lucky to be alive. When the noise of the crash finally stopped, there was a new noise in the van. It was a sound I had never heard before. My big brother in agony. Michael instantly and correctly self-diagnosed a broken femur. His thigh bone was broken. It's the biggest bone in the body. It takes a tremendous force to break it. It's one of the most painful bone fractures you can get. I thought I was okay. I couldn't see my legs below the knee. They were trapped under the driver's seat. Michael asked if I could move my toes. I said I could. And then, and only then, he told me that meant I wasn't paralyzed. When someone leaned into the taxi and asked how many injured, I said just one. I was wrong. Luckily, both of the drivers were uninjured. The drunk driver who hit us was saved by an airbag. Our taxi driver, a wonderful man, had his livelihood ruined that night, but his seatbelt allowed him to go home to his wife that night and visit us in the hospital the next day. The little island we were on has a little hospital that can do x-rays but cannot do surgery. The x-rays showed that Michael needed surgery for the broken femur, and I needed surgery for a broken hip that didn't really begin to hurt until I was pulled out of the taxi. And then my family went to work. Not the O'Donnells this time, my work family. You know those people who tell you that the company they work for is like family to them, and you don't believe them? How's this for family? A team led by the president of this network, Phil Griffin, and Pat Philly Cruchel, head of the NBC News Group, worked through the night to get me back to New York for surgery, and they did exactly the same thing for my brother Michael. They didn't have to do that. They sure didn't have to get my brother out, but they did. That's what family does. At some point in the rest of the years that I work here, I hope to find the words to adequately thank Phil and Pat and Izzy Povich and Greg Kordick and everyone who worked those 18 hours to get 2 air ambulances to bring me to New York and Michael to Boston so he could be with his family when he came out of surgery. Our planes landed in New York and Boston around midnight Sunday night. An ambulance took me to a place I had never heard of, the Hospital for Special Surgery. It's rated #1 in the country and therefore the world for orthopedic surgery. The first words I saw when I was rolled into the hospital was the name David H. Koch. Yes, that David Koch. Now brace yourselves, please, for the first positive words said about David Koch on this program. I agree with Harry Reid's critique of the Koch brothers' contributions to American politics, but that is not the only thing they contribute to. They have given $100 million to Lincoln Center. They have given huge amounts of money to medical research and treatment. David Koch has given over $25 million to the hospital that put me and many other men, women, and children back together, people with much worse injuries than I had. David Koch's money helped make their hospital experience a better one, and that is a very, very good thing. F. Scott Fitzgerald spoke to what some of you are feeling right now when he said, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." You can pass that test. I know you can. You can be outraged by what the Koch brothers do with their money in politics, and you can appreciate what they contribute to hospitals and medical research. And you can do that at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Look, I'm doing it right now, and I'm still sort of functioning. And so, yes, I feel some gratitude to David Koch, and I feel much more gratitude to many more people than I will ever be able to thank. The emergency medical technician in Tortola who got Michael out of that taxi cab and then got me out of that taxi cab, both of us on stretchers. I wish I knew his name, or the names of the strong men in that neighborhood who rushed from their houses. They rushed in there to help lift our stretchers out of that taxi cab. I've thanked my brilliant surgeon, Dr. David Helfet, many times, and I'll never stop thanking him. Dr. Helfet, like many of my friends in show business today, sent me an email joking about how he can't quite bring himself to say, break a leg tonight. Living among the medical community as I did for weeks was a huge revelation to me. I'd never been hospitalized before. I had never seen the extraordinary daily kindness and heroism of nurses up close. I had never depended on them. For weeks, I was completely dependent on them. I had only one real day and night of pain in the hospital after surgery, and it was a giant order of magnitude, the worst pain I have ever experienced. It is actually an ordeal that many post-surgical patients go through, and I cannot get into the details now because it is just too gross. Trust me, I'm not kidding about that. And if you've been through it, you know what I'm talking about. A nurse named John Frank Ellis got me through that night. It was, in its way, as hard a night for John as it was for me. I've never been more dependent on anyone in my adulthood and never been more grateful. The next night when John came back on duty, I gave him a thank you note in a sealed envelope with some cash in it, a lot of cash in it, a token of my indescribable gratitude. John took the envelope, the sealed envelope, he left the room, and a few minutes later he came back in and he said, my thanks was all that mattered to him. And he handed me back the money. And he told me that it was against his personal ethics and against hospital policy to accept gifts like that. I had no idea. I had no idea I'd crossed a line. This was all new to me. So you can tip people who clean your room in hotels, but you can't tip nurses. I didn't know that. Great nurses don't do it for the money. Yes, they care about and they rely on their paychecks, but they couldn't do the work they do. The great nurses couldn't do that. They couldn't do it the way they do it if the motivation didn't come from the goodness of their hearts. You wouldn't recognize John as a hero if you saw him going to or from work on the subway with his backpack, and John doesn't ask to be treated like a hero. None of the nurses I met want that. They want to make a living that allows them to support their families, and they want to help people in the process, people they don't even know, including people who will forget them. The doctors and nurses I have met have something that most of the rest of us don't have, the absolute certainty every time they go to work that they're going to do something important today, something invaluable for someone else. All the physical therapists who've been helping me learn to walk again have that same quiet kindness, that same dedication. When you watch us on TV getting all caught up in the news of the day, which often means the bad news of the day, it's worth trying to remember that an awful lot went right in this country today. Yes, we have a dysfunctional Congress, but not far down the street from them, we have people working in hospitals doing remarkable things to save lives every day. When's the last time you saved a life? I've never done that either. If you saved a life, a baby, a mother, a grandfather, don't you think you would feel that was more newsworthy than what some angry, ineffectual politician said in Washington today? I'm not sure there's anything we in the news business can do about that, but you can. You can listen to what we think the news of the day is, but never lose sight of the fact that more good things happened in America and the world today than we can possibly report to you or that we know how to report to you. Don't ever lose that perspective. The nurse who spent the most time with me in New York is Shannon Lawrence. Our shared name was less interesting to me than her first name, Shannon. As an Irish-American kid growing up in a place like Boston, I developed an ear for the ethnicity in every name. On our first day together, I asked Shannon how she got an Irish first name. She said her father was wounded in World War II and was sent to a hospital in England for treatment. The nurses there, literally, did not want to touch the black soldiers in that hospital. Then an Irish nurse came along and took good care of Shannon's father. The Irish nurse's name was Shannon. It would be a beautiful story, even if Shannon didn't grow up to become a nurse, but she did, and so it's a perfect story. My nurse, Shannon, has spent her life sharing the same healing kindness and grace that her father's nurse did. And on my last day in New York, I told Shannon that if I had another daughter, I would name her Shannon.